Morning, ladies. Welcome to our Wednesday morning weekly Tanya Shaar. We're studying Shaar Hayichud ve'Emunah. We're holding toward the beginning of Perek Beis. The Alter Rebbe is teaching us that Hashem's creation of the world is constant and ongoing. The godly force, the godly power that brought the world into existence in the 6 days of creation needs to constantly remain in the created beings. Every created being has its own divine godly force, its own koyach of Hashem that keeps it in existence every single second. Were it to stop for a moment, the world would cease to exist. This the Alter Rebbe has brought to us in Perek Aleph, both as a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov. In other words, we have a tradition, we have a Mesorah. The Baal Shem Tov taught it this way, the Alter Rebbe taught it this way. And then in Perek Beis, the Alter Rebbe goes into more of the logic, more of the understanding of it, that if you think about the creation of the world, there really isn't any other way to understand it other than this way. Again, the idea that creation is ongoing and the koyach, the energy of Hashem that brings things into existence, needs to be there every single second to create it over and over and over again. Very, very famous concept. Really, much of Chassidus is based on this. Okay, so we're holding Perek Beis. I'm going to start today from the words "V'hu pele Gdly yoser me Kris Yam Suf." So in the Hebrew Tanya, Perek Beis, it's the second line of page 154. In the lessons in Tanya, "V'hu pele Gdly yoser me Kris Yam Suf," the Shaar Hayichud ve'Emunah, chapter 2, page 845. The Alter Rebbe is here, the understanding of what's going on is that the Alter Rebbe is talking about the difference between what he calls yesh miyesh and yesh ma'ayin. Yesh miyesh, discussed again a lot in Chassidus. Yesh miyesh is when you take something that is in one form and you transition it into a different form of existence. You take one thing, you make something out of something else. This is called yesh miyesh. Yesh ma'ayin is where you make something from nothing. When a tzoirif, when a smith, blacksmith, silversmith, takes material and makes a keli, takes wood and makes a bench, takes pottery and makes a bowl, takes silver and makes candlesticks, whatever the case may be. So this is the classic example of yesh miyesh. And with yesh miyesh, the rule is that once the transition has been made, it no longer requires the force that brought about the transition. The one who made this transition, the one who made the keli, no longer needs to be involved. Once the wood has been made into a bench and the silver has been made into a candlestick or whatever the case may be, then the person who made this no longer has to be involved. The keli, the vessel, can hold on to its new form by itself. The person who made it can leave it. On the other hand, with yesh me'ayin, when you make something from nothing, even after the force that has made this thing, that has created it, has made it yesh me'ayin, still the thing itself, again, I'm using these words, the thing itself is unable to hold on to its own existence. It's unable to retain this. And so the thing itself would not continue to exist if the force that created it wouldn't continue to create it. This is the point the Alter Rebbe makes. The Alter Rebbe is making it, is arguing that this is a logical point, that this is relatively easy to understand, and those who don't believe this are Poshet not understanding, Poshet from a human perspective, the nature of what's involved of creating something yesh ma'ayin. Of course, they're not just fools, they're also heretics, because this mistake of theirs led them to deny the concept of Hashgacha Pratis, Hashem's involvement in all of existence. It led them to not be able to believe in the miracles of Torah, etc. Okay, this is where we're up to. The who, says the Alter Rebbe, this creating of yesh ma'ayin, creating of something from nothing. Who pele Gdly yoser me Kris Yam Suf. This is, even to create something from nothing is an even greater pele, is an even greater awesome accomplishment, an even greater wonder even more so than Kris Yam Suf. What do we want with Kris Yam Suf? Al derech mashal. We're using, the Alter wants to use Kris Yam Suf as a mashal. Not that Kris Yam Suf is a mashal. Kris Yam Suf is a story in Torah. But as far as the creation, the conversation of Yesh Ma'ayin is concerned, we want to use this as a mashal. What happened by Kris Yam Suf? Shehoylech Hashem es hayom, beruach kodim aza kol alaylo, vayiboku hamoyim v'nitzvu k'moyned u'kachayma. So, without getting into too much of the actual discussion as to what exactly was the science of the miracle of Kris Yam Suf and how exactly to understand the Pesukim, because the commentaries have many, many different explanations of exactly what happened. The Alter Rebbe is going to focus on this one idea, that the Rabbanu Shalom, the Eibishter made, water stand k'moyned u'kachayma. The Eibishter made the wall stand up like a wall. And he did this, Hashem did this by bringing a ruach kodim, by bringing an eastern wind that blew the whole night. Shoylech Hashem asayom, that the Hashem made this wind, this eastern wind blew all night. And the wind made the wall, made the water, the wind made the water stand like a wall. That's what happened. The wind blew against the water and made it stand up, erected it like a wall. And that's what happened all night. The ilu hifsik havayas ruach kerega, were this wind to stop blowing the water even for a moment, if the wind were to stop for a moment, so the water would go back to its original nature, its original derech of flowing, and it would not stand like a wall, b'li safek, without any doubt. So just like this is the mashal. All right, this is the mashal. This is the point. If in order to make water stand like a wall, you need a wind that should constantly blow on it, and if the wind were to stop for a moment, the water would go back to the way it was before, then the Alter Rebbe will say how much, and that is not to create the water. That's just to make water that already existed stand instead of flowing. How much more so when it comes to actually creating something are we going to have to say logically that the force that creates it needs to be there constantly, and if the force stops creating it, it'll go back to the way it was beforehand, which is absolutely nothing. Okay. Now, if you have the lessons in Tanya, so you can follow along, you can see that the explanation here is that the Alter Rebbe is not saying that to take water which flows and make it stand like a wall is yesh ma'ayin. It's actually not yesh ma'ayin. It's yesh miyesh. It's taking water which under normal circumstances has one nature and changing that nature and making water which flows stand like a wall. So that's an example actually not of yesh ma'ayin. That's an example of yesh miyesh. What the Alter Rebbe is saying here is that if by Kris Yam Suf, where you're not really doing yesh ma'ayin, it's just yesh miyesh, you're just taking something which exists in one form and you're changing the form. We're still saying that the force which changes the form of the water needs to be there constantly. And if the wind were to stop, the water would go back to its original nature. Then how much more so when it comes to creating things yesh me'ayin, for sure do you need the koyach of yesh me'ayin to be there constantly, and if not, it would cease to exist. It's called the kal v'chomer. It's called the kal v'chomer. If Kris Yam Suf, where you're not doing yesh me'ayin, it's just yesh miyesh, you're just taking something and changing its form, but the change is so radical, the change to take water which flows and make it stand, it's such a radical change that the water, that the wind has to be there constantly to create this change. And if it were to stop, the water would go back to the way it was. Then how much more so when it comes to yesh ma'ayin, where we take something that didn't exist and make it exist, how much more so do you need the koyach to be there constantly? I'm going to read a little further. Even though this nature of water, that water flows, the natural nature of water nivra was already created. Umechudesh yesh me'ayin, and Hashem already made it. Hashem already made the nature of this water that it should flow. A wall of stones, nitzeves me'atzma beli ruach. A wall, so why is it that a wall stands without wind? A wall doesn't need wind to hold it up. A wall stands. But when water stands, water needs wind to keep it up. Well, the answer is simple. Because Hashem, who created the wall and the water, created the nature of the wall to stand and the nature of the water to flow. So the nature of the water to flow already existed. And yet Hashem changed it and made the water which usually flows, made it stand. All right, so again, it's the same point. It's yesh meyesh. So even yesh meyesh, if it's such a radical yesh meyesh, would need a constant koyach, would need a constant force to keep it in existence. Much more so when it comes to yesh ma'ayin, shehi l'mayla mateva, which is beyond nature. And a greater wonder than Kris Yam Suf. Much more so that if the power of the Creator would leave the created being, chas v'shalom, yoshev anivra la'ayin ve'efes mamash. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the Alter Rebbe's point. He's claiming that the Alter Rebbe is making a logical argument, and it's called a kal v'chomer. If Kris Yam Suf, where the nature of the water was already created by Hashem, was already in existence, the creation of the water is created such that the water flows. To make it stand, you need a constant force, and much more so when it comes to bringing things into existence. Okay. Another mashal for this idea, which we mentioned a few times, that the Alter Rebbe does not bring here, but Chassidus brings in many places, is the mashal of the throwing of the stone, where the stone, the nature of the stone on its own is to fall, is to go down. If the koyach of a person invested in the stone pushes the stone up, then as long as the koyach is there, it'll push it. Once the koyach ceases to exist, the stone will go back to its original nature, the original nature of falling to the ground. Okay, here, with regard to the actual argument that the Alter Rebbe is making, here there is a very famous question that's discussed in many of the Chassidus books. Specifically, I'm referring to a book called Hatomim, printed in the times of the Friedrich Rebbe, where the question is discussed. And really, if you think about it, it's a question that begs asking. The Alter Rebbe is comparing the creation of heaven and earth, let's say, to Kris Yam Suf. Well, he's saying it's much more than Kris Yam Suf, but it's not less than Kris Yam Suf. Kris Yam Suf, Hashem took the nature of water. Hashem took water, and Hashem made water stand like a wall. Now, he didn't change it into a wall completely. It remained water. So it remained water, and as water, it stood like a wall. In order to have that, you need the constant koyach of Hashem, need the constant koyach of Hashem through the wind that kept the water standing. If it were to stop, the water would go back to flying. So he's saying how much more so when it comes to the creation of the world, how much more so do you need the constant koyach of Hashem to keep the world in existence? So here's the question. The question is, how could you compare? When Hashem did Kris Yam Suf, Hashem took water. Hashem took something, which is water, and made it stand like a wall. Now, water was created by Hashem with a nature to flow, right? Like the Alter Rebbe himself says, unlike a wall that was created by Hashem with a nature to stand, water was created by Hashem with a nature to flow. So if you want to take that same water with that same nature and make it stand, so you need a constant koyach. Yes, it's yesh miyesh, but you need a constant koyach that will push the water to stand. This makes sense. You want to take a stone that has a nature to fall and you want to make it fly. You need a constant koyach that will push it to fly. But when Hashem created the world and He created it yesh ma'ayin, Yesh ma'ayin, well, yesh ma'ayin means many things. But on the most simple of levels, yesh ma'ayin means that beforehand it didn't exist. So if it didn't exist, then there was nothing there. So if there was nothing there, and then Hashem went and created something. So why are we comparing this to something that had a previous nature? Water, which stands, had a previous nature to flow, has an underlying nature to flow. A stone which flies has a previous nature, has an underlying nature to fall. The power that makes the water stand is fighting with the nature of the water to flow. The power that makes the stone fly is flying with the natural tendency of the stone to fall. So if it's fighting with it, it needs to fight with it constantly. If it stops for a second, then the stone will go back to its original nature, and the water will go back to its original nature. This makes sense. But when it comes to Hashem creating Yesh Ma'ayin, so it's true, of course. In other words, it's easy to understand, of course, that the Alter Rebbe is saying that to create Yesh Ma'ayin is a greater Pele, is a bigger awesomeness. It's more wondrous. It's more wowing, right? Than to take something which already exists and change its nature. Yesh Ma'ayin is a greater miracle, no question. But when you create Yesh Ma'ayin, it seems you're dealing with something that didn't exist before. So if it didn't exist before, then there was nothing. So if there was nothing and then you create it, then the creation is not fighting with any previous nature. There's no previous agenda that we're working against. Let's go back here and re-articulate the question. It's a very simple question, but it needs to be articulated, or at least I should say, I need in my brain to articulate this again. It makes sense when one force is fighting with the other force. When a second agenda is fighting with a first agenda, it makes sense that because the first agenda is first, it makes sense to say that that's the original nature of the object, of the thing. And so the second agenda will have to constantly push its agenda onto the first agenda. Otherwise, the first agenda will go back to its original agenda and exercise its right. So if you want to take water whose nature is to flow and make it stand, you need a constant koyach, of course. Otherwise, the water will do what it naturally does, which is flow. If you want to make the stone fly, you need a constant koyach to push the stone. Otherwise, the stone will do what it naturally does, which is fall. But what about when you deal with something which doesn't have an original nature? There's no agenda at all. Not just there's no agenda at all. There's no existence at all. It's Yesh Ma'ayin. So if it's Yesh Ma'ayin, means before that there was nothing. There was no existence at all. So once Hashem creates it and brings and pushes this thing into existence, so now it exists. So where's the previous agenda? Where's the previous nature of this thing? Bedavka not to exist, that the thing itself is fighting, so to speak, with the koyach of Hashem. The koyach of Hashem is pushing it into existence. And the thing itself is fighting with, philosophically, is fighting with the koyach of Hashem that's bringing it into existence and pulling itself into non-existence because that's its natural state. Why are we saying that its natural state is to not exist? If it didn't exist beforehand, then it doesn't have any natural state. The stone wants to fall. The stone's nature wants to fall. The koyach of the person is pushing it against its nature. No, so as long as you push it, you ever tried to do something to somebody against their nature? As long as you push the person against their nature, you'll do it against their nature. Once you stop pushing, the person goes back to their original nature. Now, can you change the person's nature? It depends how drastically you're working against their nature. If it's 100% against the grain of their nature, at some point you cannot change the nature. And then, as long as you push, as soon as you stop pushing, it goes back to its original nature. The stone wants to fall. That's its nature. A human being doesn't have the power to change that in a stone. The stone's nature is to fall. You push the stone into the air, the stone will fly. How long? As long as your koyach has the power to override the nature of the stone. The nature of water is to flow. Hashem brought a wind. The wind forced the water against its nature to stand. Okay, now the water stands. But the water is fighting with the koyach. The water wants to flow. How long will the koyach override the nature of the water? As long as the koyach is there. Pull the koyach away, and the water will go back to its original nature. This is relatively simple to understand. The challenge here in understanding becomes, how do we compare this to Hashem's creating of heaven and earth? Before Hashem created the world, this cup didn't exist, right? Now Hashem did create it. Now the cup is created Yesh Ma'ayin. But once the cup is created, yesh ma'ayin, the Alter Rebbe is saying the koyach that created the cup has to push it into existence again and again. If not, the cup's natural state is to not exist. Why are we saying it's the nature of the cup to not exist? Where does the cup get that nature from? Why are we assuming? Why is it so obvious to the Alter Rebbe that the cup resists its own existence, like water resists being stood up like a wall, like a stone resists being thrown into the air? The cup is resisting its existence. Why? Because Hashem created yesh ma'ayin. If Hashem created yesh ma'ayin, that means the cup didn't exist. It didn't have, the cup did not existing is not existing. Why are we assuming that the cup, even after it's brought into existence, has still some previous agenda from the time when it wasn't in existence? If it didn't exist, it doesn't have energy. It's not carrying any agenda. It seems like fakert, but dafka bayesh, if anything, the logic works the opposite. But dafka bayesh ma'ayin, where it previously didn't exist, and then Hashem brought it into existence and created it, so now the thing exists. Why can we not say that it can hold onto its own existence just naturally, just by nature, because Hashem now created it? Why is the Alter Rebbe insisting that the cup itself, the existence itself, its tendency, its nature is to not exist and fights with its own existence? And the koyach of Hashem has to constantly, against the nature of the thing, push it into existence again and again. All right. I hope the question is clear. This is discussed at great length in the Hasidic works. If the question is not clear, you can let me know in the comments, and I'll try to explain it again. But this is the question. The answer is incredibly important. The answer is really the answer to this question. Really, in truth, becomes the key, in my humble opinion, to the whole understanding of what Chassidus teaches us in Yesh Ma'ayin. Without this answer, I feel we're not really touching, we're not really even correctly understanding the whole concept of the Yesh Ma'ayin and what the Alter Rebbe wants here. Here's the answer, at least to the best of my very limited understanding. As Jews, of course, as believing Jews, we all believe that Hashem created the world. And before Hashem created the world didn't exist. Now, what exactly does it mean before Hashem created the world? It needs to be understood, because the concept of time is also created. So what does it mean before the world was created? It's a good shayla. But be it as it may, however we're going to interpret it, there was a time or a reality or a realm in which the world didn't exist. Hashem had to bring the world into existence. Okay. Chassidus says that's not a full, complete understanding of what's going on. It's not the pshat that the world didn't exist, or there was nothing, right? And then there was something. Then Hashem created yesh ma'ayin, something from nothing, right? Let's say in this room right now, let's say there's 10 chairs. So where's the 11th chair? There is no 11th chair. So what will I do? I'll go and I'll bring the 11th chair into the room. Now there's 11, right? So before there wasn't an 11th chair, and now there is. So this says this is not the pshat. This is not the pshat. This is incorrect. There's a deeper understanding that we need to come to. Before the world existed, Hashem existed. Hashem always existed. The nature of Hashem's, so to speak, the nature of Hashem's existence is such that it always was, and it always will be, and it's not possible for it to be any different. It's called, Hashem's existence is called anatzmi, meaning it has to be this Hashem's existence is mechoyev ametzius. It has to be that way. It's not possible for it to be any different. Always was, always will be, higher than time, higher than space, higher than everything. Okay. Together with Hashem's existence comes something. Now, it comes something. What comes? Together with Hashem's existence comes an inability for anything else to exist. The nature of Hashem's existence is such that nothing else can exist other than Hashem. Now you can ask, where did that nature come from? And that's a good question. The answer, of course, is that Hashem made it that way. And you can ask why Hashem made it that way, and that's also a good question. And maybe there's even no answer to that question. But this we know for sure, that the idea that Hashem's nature, that the nature, so to speak, of Hashem's existence requires, facilitates, obligates, is responsible for the fact that nothing else can exist other than Hashem. And I'm going to give you a really maybe silly example, but it's an example of my own that in my head fits. You know, every kid at some point starts asking their mother and father, and mommy and tati, who made Hashem? Right? Because everything in the child's world reality is made by something, by someone, comes from somewhere. So the child starts to ask, who made Hashem? All right, there's many different ways of how do you answer that question to a child, right? Avraham Avinu figured this out at the age of 3. Human nature is to wonder about this at an early age. Who made Hashem? Who made Hashem? So you start with, well, Hashem was always there, but how was Hashem always there? You know, there's different ways to answer it. Once a child becomes even a little older, here's one of the ways to deal with this question. Say to the child, tell me, 1 + 1 = 2. Yeah. Who made that 1 + 1 = 2? Who made that 1 + 1 = 2? I don't mean who made the terminology that 1 means 1 and plus means plus and equals. That's not what I mean. I mean the actual svara, the amitius, the idea, the inyan, that 1 + 1 = 2. Who made that? Who made that? No one made it. How old is it? It's actually beyond time. Where does it exist exactly? Where does it exist? It exists everywhere. It's a certain truth. There's a certain intellectual amitius to it, certain truth to it, that is actually, it's beyond time. It's beyond space. And to the best of what we can wrap our heads around, no human being or no force ever actually brought it into existence. No force could have brought it into existence. It's the type of existence that retains its existence within itself. Tati or mommy, will Hashem exist forever? Let me ask you, my dear child, will 1 + 1 = 2 forever? Will there ever come a time where 1 + 1 will equal 3? No, of course not. 1 + 1 = 2 will exist, will be that way forever. And I don't only mean 1 + 1 = 2. Any simple logical truth. Logic, now how truthful is logic? That's its own discussion. But logic intellect has certain abilities to have self-contained, obvious truths. That's a mashal. Does 1 + 1 = 2 agree that Epis maybe on Tuesday afternoon, maybe 1 + 1 = 2 should have a little Avas Yisrael. And every now and then, Epis on a Wednesday afternoon for 30 minutes, you should allow 1 + 1 to = 3. Be a little kind, be a little tolerant, right? You never heard of diversity? Come on. No, so stubborn. It can only equal 2, and it'll always equal 2. And anders kann it sein, cannot be any different. Never was, never will be. Nothing else is possible. If a kid is old enough, they can start to wrap their heads around this idea sooner or later that this is an independent standing truth. And the truth of it is so powerful that it doesn't allow for any other truth. It's a mashal. It's how you can start to explain to a child the idea that there's something called mechuyev hametzias, something that exists, not because anything else brought it into existence, because the truth of it is so powerful that it has to exist on its own. But it's more than that. The truth of it is so powerful that it doesn't allow for any other existence. When we say that the Eibishter created the world yesh ma'ayin, we don't mean that the world technically didn't exist before Hashem created it. We mean that the world couldn't exist before Hashem created it. Why couldn't the world exist? Because nothing could exist. Why could nothing exist? Because the Eibishter existed. And the truth is, nothing else exists besides for Hashem. It's true and intrinsic within the godly nature of existence of Hashem that nothing else could exist besides for Hashem. Cups cannot exist, and tables cannot exist, and chair cannot exist. Nothing could exist, nothing at all. When we then say that the Eibishter took this, the Eibishter then created the world, and he created it yesh me'ayin, we don't just mean that he created something from nothing, means that before it didn't exist and now it existed. No. Yesh me'ayin doesn't just mean something that existed from something that didn't. Yesh me'ayin means he created it from me'ayin, means from something that couldn't exist. And why couldn't it exist? Because the Eibishter said it cannot exist. Because there's nothing else that exists besides the Eibishter. And the Eibishter said, okay, and since Hashem said, since I'm not limited by that, I could take even a world that cannot exist because Hashem exists, and nothing else could exist besides for Hashem, and I could take that and I'll make a world out of it. And we'll still be able to say that nothing else exists besides for Hashem. Chassidus will teach us that even after Hashem takes something that doesn't exist because it couldn't exist, and then made it exist, we'll still say nothing else exists besides for Hashem. That's what we're learning here. But that becomes really the deeper, or I should say, really the true meaning of Yesh Me'ayin, to create something that not just that didn't technically exist beforehand, but that inherently, in essence, couldn't exist. L'chayra, this is the reason, I'm going to wrap up the Shaar now. L'chayra, this is the reason why the Alter Rebbe is comparing it to Kris Yam Suf. What's the Alter Rebbe saying? The Eibishter took water. Water has a nature. Water has a nature which the Eibishter created, granted. But the nature of water is that it flows, and it took that water that naturally flows and made it stand like a wall. You want to take water that in other words, you want to retain its existence as water. It should still be water. And at the same time, it should stand like a wall. You're going to need a constant koyach to work against the natural nature of water to flow. If the koyach ceases, the water goes back to the way it was beforehand. And the same with the throwing of the stone. Says the Alter Rebbe, and that's only yesh miyesh. That's to take something that already existed, which because the Eibishter created, just from one nature to another nature. Now talk to me about yesh me'ayin. Talk to me about yesh me'ayin, which means to take something not just that didn't exist, but couldn't exist. Because the divine truth, the truth of the nature of the existence of Hashem, which requires and which demands that nothing else exists besides for Hashem, said there cannot be a world. Now you want to take a world which cannot exist because the Lakus says it cannot exist, and you want to push that into existence? Number one, of course, you need a koyach of Hashem. Only Hashem can do that. And even that koyach Hashem is going to constantly have to push and persevere against the intrinsic nature of this thing. And the intrinsic nature of this thing is actually not to exist. Because everything comes from Hashem. And Hashem's original form of existence doesn't allow anything else to exist. What we achieve by this, of course, in the end is going to be, like I said before, that even after the Eibishter brought it into existence, we're still going to say nothing else exists besides for Hashem. Because it's not a true existence. It's just another form of expressing in and milvada. But the idea that the underlying nature of everything that Hashem created is to express the godly truth that nothing else exists besides for Hashem, this idea remains inside every existence. And the Dvar Hashem, the Koyach of Hashem that creates it, takes the thing, transitions the thing, yesh me'ayin, from one form to another form, from the form of expressing the unity of Hashem by not existing, through expressing the unity of Hashem by existing. But it has to do so constantly, otherwise the thing itself will go back to its original form of existing, of not existing. In other words, if you say, go back to my mashal of 1 + 1 = 2, say 1 + 1 = 2 exists. Yes, absolutely. How about 1 + 1 = 3 doesn't exist? Shtemes. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, doesn't exist. Now, how about if 1 + 1 = 2 could make Pella, could make such a wondrous miracle that it could make that 1 + 1 should equal 3. Let's say 1 + 1 = 2, right? Could make such a Pella, such a moifa, such a miracle that for Tuesday afternoon, 1 + 1 should equal 3. We'll say, listen, okay. As long as it'll push that into existence, it'll exist. But if it'll stop for a second, it'll go right back to the way it was before, which is the natural way, which is the logical way, which is the way that makes sense, which is that 1 + 1 does not equal 3. It'll go back to non-existence. In other words, Chassidus wants us to look around at the whole world, at all of existence, and say, in truth, none of this should really exist because the Eibishter exists. And if the Eibishter exists, the truth is Einan Milvada, that nothing else exists besides for Hashem. How does it exist, Lepoil? It exists because the Eibishter, because there's a koyach of Hashem that pushes it into existence, but pushes into existence constantly. And if it were to stop, it would go back to nothing. This explains, again, the Kal V'chomer. The Kal V'chomer is if Kris Yam Suf, where Hashem took water with a physical nature, but because it was a physical nature in this direction, not that direction, you changed the nature of it too much. You need a constant koyach. So much more so when it comes to creating yesh ma'ayin, definitely does it need the koyach of Hashem to constantly, definitely does it need the koyach of Hashem to constantly recreate it yesh ma'ayin. Otherwise, it would cease to exist. Okay, Mirz Hashem, next week we're going to continue. We're going to continue from the words Ela Tzorech Liyas Koyach HaPoel B'Nifel. Alter Rebbe goes back. Alter Rebbe goes back here in Perek Beis to talking about where exactly is this Koyach of Hashem coming from that creates the world. We're going to go back to a discussion about the Asara Mamoros, the 10 utterances of Hashem that are recorded in Torah that brought the world into existence in the 6 days of creation, and keep it into existence every moment from there. Thank you for being here, and have a wonderful week.